When I first saw the wedding photo, I thought it was a cruel joke. A familiar smile, that dimple on her left cheek, the one I used to kiss goodnight when she was little, staring back at me from beside my husband, now dressed as a bride. I remember sitting there on the couch, the evening sun pouring through the curtains, painting everything gold except the inside of my chest that felt hollow, gray, and cold. The phone slipped from my hands, hit the carpet, and the world seemed to stop spinning. That girl. That young woman in white, she was the child I had raised for 15 years. Her name was Aisha. My name is Mariam. And this is how I found out that the man I once stalked, trusted with my life, had been building a secret so dark, so twisted, that it destroyed the meaning of family itself. Before all this, before betrayal became the language of my days, life used to be soft, like the hum of the old ceiling fan in our living room. I worked as a school counselor at the nearby girls' college. My husband, Rashid, ran a small construction business that kept him busy, but proud. We weren't rich, but our home was full of laughter, of noise, of chai cups half finished on the table. And then there was Aisha. She wasn't born to me, but from the first night she came into our lives, I felt like Allah had sent her straight into my arms. Her mother, Ruxana, had been a distant cousin who vanished one night, leaving behind a scared 5-year-old girl. Social workers found my name listed as the next of kin, and before I could think twice, I said yes. I still remember her first night with us, sitting at the edge of the bed, clutching her tiny teddy bear, eyes swollen from crying. I brought her a glass of warm milk and said softly, "No one is taking you anywhere now. You're home, beta." She didn't answer that night. But the next morning, she followed me around the house, holding the corner of my dupatta. That's how it began, motherhood by accident, love by choice. Over the years, she became the center of our world. Rashid doted on her too, or so I thought. He'd bring her toys after work, help her with homework, call her Mary Choti John. Sometimes, when I'd catch them laughing together, I'd feel a warmth that words couldn't touch. We weren't perfect, but we were happy, or maybe I was just blind. Things started changing slowly, the kind of slow that sneaks up on you. Like a crack in the wall you stop noticing until it splits the whole house. It began with Rashid's distance. He started spending longer hours at work. At first I thought it was just business stress. He'd come home late, tired, smelling faintly of cologne instead of cement and dust. When I'd ask if everything was okay, he'd say, "You worry too much, Mariam. Go rest. I'm fine." What? But he wasn't. His laughter was forced, his eyes darted away from mine when we spoke. And at night, he started sleeping on the couch, claiming he didn't want to wake me when he came in late. Then one evening, I noticed something strange. He had left his phone on the kitchen counter, something he never did. The screen lit up with a message from a number saved as Aver. Just one letter. Just one letter. The message said, "I can't wait for tomorrow night. Don't forget what you promised." My heart sank. I stood there, frozen, my hands trembling as I picked up the phone. But before I could open the thread, Rashid walked in. He saw the phone in my hand, and his face turned pale. "Mariam." "Give that back," he said quietly. "Who's you, Rashid?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He took a deep breath, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "It's a supplier. Just work talk. Don't read too much into things." But I did, because I had seen the way his jaw tightened. The way his thumb hovered near the delete button. I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him. But something in my chest had already begun to unravel. Around that same time, Aisha had started behaving differently too. She was 17 then, in her last year of school, beautiful, bright, full of life. But she'd started avoiding me. She wouldn't sit with me during dinner. She'd spend hours locked in her room, whispering on the phone, and if I asked who she was talking to, she'd snap, "Just a friend, Amy. Don't start interrogating me. She never used to talk to me like that." One night I found her sneaking out in the middle of the night. She said she was meeting friends for a study project. Rashid, instead of being angry, told me to let her go, that she's growing up, Miriam, don't cage her. I remember thinking, when did we start talking like strangers about our own child? The next morning, when I saw Rashid drop her off at school, I brushed it off as coincidence. But the following week, I saw it again and again. One Sunday, I gathered courage and asked him, "Why are you dropping Aisha to school these days? I thought you had early sight meetings, and now the sirs pricked it to stimpers per tepper sure fear."
He shrugged, for turfer to bildement turf for sure datation. He shrugged. "You were asleep," she asked me, that's all. Something about his tone, casual, almost rehearsed, sent a chill down my spine, but I said nothing. Because when you've built your life around someone, you'll ignore every crack just to keep the walls from falling. Then came the day he left, no fight, no warning. Just a note on the kitchen table that said, I can't do this anymore, please don't try to find me. No, it was a Tuesday, I was making Dale when I found it. I sat there for hours, staring at those words, hoping maybe there was more, a reason, a goodbye something. But there was only silence. I told myself he'd come back, that maybe he just needed space. But weeks passed and then months. Aisha refused to talk about him. She withdrew even more, avoiding me, missing school, staring out the window for hours. Sometimes I'd hear her crying softly at night. I thought she missed him too. I had no idea the truth was so much darker than grief. It was about 5 months after Rashid left when everything began to make sense, painfully, piece by piece. Aisha had just turned 18. I threw her a small birthday dinner, just the two of us. I cooked her favorite biryani, baked a slightly lopsided chocolate cake. I thought maybe this would help bridge the growing distance between us, but she barely touched the food. Her phone kept buzzing. She kept checking it, smiling faintly at messages she wouldn't let me see. I tried to keep things light. I said softly, your father used to tell me that when you smile, the whole house feels brighter. No. She looked up at me sharply. He's not my father, she said. Her tone was sharp. Too sharp. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I forced a smile. Aisha, I didn't mean. No, you always mean, she snapped, standing up from the table. You always talk about him like he was some saint. He left you, Emmy. He left us. Why can't you accept that? Before I could answer, she grabbed her phone and stormed out. The front door slammed. My fork clattered onto the plate. And for the first time since Rashid left, I felt something heavy inside me. Not sadness this time, but dread. Because when she said he's not my father, there was something in her eyes. Not anger, not pain. Something else. Something she was hiding. Be you shark to mine a mushter. Something else. Something she was hiding. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Every conversation, every strange glance between them, every innocent car ride replayed in my head like a haunting. At around r.a.m. I went into her room. She wasn't there. Her bed was neatly made, the window slightly open. My heart started pounding. I called her. Phone, switched off. I called again. Nothing. I sat on her bed, clutching her pillow, trying not to panic. I told myself maybe she went to a friend's house. Maybe she'd be back by morning. But she didn't come back that morning, nor the next. When I finally called her school, they told me she hadn't been attending classes for weeks. My blood ran cold. I filed a missing person report, but deep down, I already knew where to look. It was a Sunday afternoon when my cousin Sanaa came running into my office, breathless, clutching her phone. Mariam, she whispered, her voice shaking. Please, you need to see this. She showed me a social media post, a wedding photo. There he was, Rashid, in a cream sherwani, grinning like a man who had just erased his past. And beside him, smiling shyly in a red bridal dress, was Aisha, my Aisha. The girl I had raised, fed, taught to pray, tucked in every night, my throat closed, the world tilted, lilted. I couldn't even cry at first. I just sat there, staring at the screen until the image blurred. Then the sobs came, violent, endless. Sana tried to hold me, but I pushed her away. No, I whispered. It can't be. It's fake. Someone edited this. She's a child, but it wasn't fake. The caption read, Nua sufter she say specian. Ter show spration, New beginnings. Rashid Ahmed weds Aisha Khan. They even had the nerve to tag a location, a small town 2 hours away. For a long time I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't carry me, my mind wouldn't accept it. Because betrayal has a way of breaking you twice. First when you realize it happened, and again when you realize who did it. I spent the next few days in silence. Neighbors came by, whispering condolences like it was a death in the family. My colleagues avoided my eyes. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, acquaintances, people who wanted the full story. But I had nothing left to say. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. I just sat in that same living room, staring at old photos. Rashid holding Aisha when she was 6, her arms around his neck. Her 8th birthday, blowing out candles while he looked on smiling. How long had it been going on? Was it after she turned 16, 17? Was every smile, every fatherly gesture a lie? The sickness that rose in me wasn't just anger. It was grief, deep and nauseating. I felt like I had failed her.
I had failed myself. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in her handwriting. I stared at it for hours before I opened it. Inside, there was only one line, please, don't hate me. I love him. No explanation, no apology. Just those 6 words that shattered me all over again. I remember standing there, the letter trembling in my hands, and whispering to myself, you don't even know what love is. That night I went through her old belongings. School notebooks, photo albums, her diary. Most of it was innocent. Until I reached the back pages, and that's where I found them, letters, folded neatly, written in Rashid's handwriting. I read every single one, my hands shaking, my tears dripping onto the ink. He'd written things like, you're the only one who understands me. Don't tell your mother, she'll never approve. Borka, when you turn 18, we'll start fresh, just you and me. Each sentence felt like a knife. Each sentence felt like a knife. He had groomed her, manipulated her, stolen her childhood. And all the while he had looked me in the eye every day and said, you worry too much, Miriam. I dropped the letters on the floor and screamed until my throat went raw. The next morning I packed a small bag, took the bus to the town listed in their wedding post, and walked straight into the registrar's office. Do you have a record of this marriage? I asked. The clerk looked it up. Yes, ma'am. Rashid Ahmed and Aisha Khan, registered last month. Can I see the papers? He hesitated, but eventually showed me the file. Rashid had declared her age as 21. He'd forged her birth certificate. I stood there, my hands trembling over the counter, my voice barely a whisper. She was 18. She's my daughter. The clerk looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I'm sorry. Everything looks legal here. Legal? That word kept echoing in my head like a cruel joke. It may have been legal on paper. Ain't it a shoe? But in truth, it was evil. That night, I stood outside the small house they shared. I saw her through the window, sitting at the dining table, her head bowed, her face pale. He sat across from her, smiling, his hand on hers, and that's when I knew she wasn't happy. She was trapped. I stood in the shadows outside their little rented house for what felt like hours. The soft yellow light inside flickered through the thin curtains, painting faint shapes on the gravel road. Every second I watched, the rage inside me grew. Cold, quiet, dangerous. There she was, my Aisha. My little girl who used to curl up in my lap when she was scared of thunder. Now sitting silently, her hands trembling as he poured her tea. Rashid was speaking, animated, confident, like he always was when he was lying. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew that expression. I'd seen it before, when he convinced me to quit my job, when he said, "Trust me," when he promised he'd always protect us. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, and I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. The next morning, I went to the police station with all the evidence I had. The fake documents, the letters, the social media posts. The officer on duty barely looked up. "Madam, she's 18. She went with him willingly. She's my daughter," I cried. "He raised fish for her so first person per purple's father," I cried. "He raised her. He's old enough to be her father." He shrugged. "There's no law against that. Unless she files a complaint, we can't do anything." I slammed my fist on the desk. "She's brainwashed. He manipulated her. Hugh prodded her." He sighed for Freet Chakro. He sighed. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but the file will just get closed." Understood. That's when I understood justice wasn't going to come from the system. If I wanted to save her, I'd have to do it myself. I started quietly. I rented a small room near their neighborhood. From there, I watched. Every morning, Rashid left for work around 9. Aisha stayed home, cleaning, cooking, sometimes going to the market with her head down, moving quickly. She looked thinner. Her eyes, the same bright eyes that once sparkled with mischief, were dull now, hollow. Once, I saw her drop an apple while shopping. The vendor scolded her harshly, and she didn't even defend herself. She just nodded, apologized, and walked away. That's when I knew she was breaking. And he was the one breaking her. One afternoon, I followed her to a small park. She sat on a bench, staring at her phone, tears in her eyes. I walked slowly toward her, my heart pounding. To Aisha me. When she looked up and saw me, she froze. "Amy," she whispered. Her lips trembled. "You shouldn't be here." I smiled sadly. "Neither should you, Beta." She shook her head, looking around nervously. "If he finds out..." "Ew." "If he finds out what?" I interrupted softly. "That your mother loves you? That she wants you to come home?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. He loves me. He takes care of me." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. Does he take care of you or control you?" Si Lashan Pamchterpshu." She looked down. Her fingers twisted around her dupatta. I could see it in her. The confusion, the guilt, the fear. "Aisha," I said, my voice breaking. "You were just a child. He made you believe lies. He's using you, Beta." Her lips trembled. "Stop it, Amy. Stop it, Amy. Please, you're just jealous. You never made him happy." I did. Those words stabbed through me, but I didn't flinch. Because beneath the anger in her tone, I heard it, the doubt. Before she could say more, Rashid's voice cut through the air. "So this is where you've been hiding?" I turned. He was standing a few feet away, his face calm, but his eyes burning with quiet fury. He sharpel home. Aisha said sharply. "Heischer's disferschel besiegen trapernapra. Ija," he said sharply. "Go home." She froze. I said, "Go home." His tone turned dark. She gnashed fairy diversions for walks before. She hesitated for a moment, then stood and walked away, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Rashid waited until she was gone before he spoke. "You should have stayed out of Daumen the Darium, Statmongd. You should have stayed out of this." "Miriam." I met his gaze. "You ruined her." He smiled faintly. "You ruined her." He smiled faintly. "No, Miriam. You ruined her. You were so busy being perfect, so desperate to control everything. I just gave her freedom." "Freedom?" I laughed bitterly. "You call this freedom? You call manipulation, lies, and grooming freedom?" He stepped closer. "You can't prove anything. Can't prove your hair ivorying every op. She's mine now. She chose me. I didn't move. I didn't even blink, because I knew something he didn't." That night, Aisha had slipped something into my hand before leaving, a small folded note. And when I read it later, I realized she wasn't as lost as I feared. He doesn't let me call anyone. Please get me out. I'm scared. For 2 more weeks, I planned carefully. I contacted a women's protection NGO, showed them her note, the letters, the false documents. They agreed to help. We arranged everything, quietly, safely, and one evening, while Rashid was at work, I went to the house again. Aisha opened the door. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "It's time to go, Beta," I whispered. "Yell?" She hesitated only for a rusty setting. She hesitated only for a second before nodding. We packed her small bag. Just clothes, a few photos, her Quran. Nothing else. We slipped out the back alley into a waiting car. For the first time in years, I felt hope. But Rashid wasn't the kind of man who let go easily. When he came home and found the house empty, he went wild. He called me again and again, screaming threats, promises, begging. I didn't answer. He even came to my building once, pounding on the door until neighbors gathered. I didn't open. Finally, he left. It's been 2 years now. Aisha's healing, slowly, therapy, prayer, distance, they've all helped. She doesn't talk about him much, but sometimes at night she wakes up crying. I sit beside her, hold her hand, and whisper, "You're safe now, Mary John. You're home." She's studying again, smiling again, living again, but some wounds never fully close. As for Rashid, he eventually got arrested. The NGO helped file a case for document forgery and coercion. He's serving time now. Justice in the end came quietly, not through rage, not through revenge, but through patience. Sometimes I sit by the window, watching the evening sun fade into gold. I think about the woman I was, soft, trusting, blind, and the woman I became, broken but awake. People think betrayal destroys you. It doesn't. It reveals you. Because only when you lose everything do you truly see what you were meant to fight for. And I fought, not for revenge, not for him to suffer, but for my daughter's soul. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your heart, remember this. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over pain, and sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is walk away and never look back. People often ask me how I found the strength to keep going. How did I get up each morning knowing that my husband, the man I trusted, the man I built my life around, had not only betrayed me, but destroyed the girl I loved like my own? The truth is, I didn't always get up. For a long time, I stayed in bed, watching the ceiling, wondering if everything I'd lived had just been an illusion. The laughter, the family dinners, the quiet nights when Rashid would read the newspaper while Aisha and I baked cookies. Was any of it real? Grief doesn't come only from death. It comes from realizing that someone you loved never really existed. Aisha and I started therapy together. The first few sessions were silent. We'd sit in that small office, the clock ticking, the air thick with things neither of us could say. One day our therapist asked her, "What do you feel when you think of him?" Aisha looked at me, then away. "Confused," she whispered. "He made me feel special and dirty at the same time." Her voice broke on that last word. That was the day I cried, truly cried, for the first time since it all happened. Because I realized something horrifying. I hadn't just lost a husband, I'd failed to protect my child. Even though I wasn't her biological mother, she had trusted me, depended on me. And somehow, through my own blindness, I'd let that monster get close enough to steal her childhood. That kind of guilt, it doesn't fade easily, but faith, my faith, is what saved me. I began praying again, not just out of habit, but with raw honesty. Some nights I didn't even recite proper du'as. I just sat on the prayer mat and said, "Ya Allah, show me how to forgive. Show me how to heal," and somehow slowly the pieces began to come together. Aisha started sketching again. She used to draw little birds and flowers when she was younger. Now her drawings were softer, calmer. We moved to a new city, a small apartment, just the two of us. Simple but peaceful. I went back to teaching, part-time at a local school. Being around children helped me remember innocence still exists in this world, that not everything is broken. One evening, while I was grading papers, Aisha sat beside me and said, "Amy, can I ask you something?" Yo, of course, Beta. She hesitated. Do you hate him? Yo, Drakenj. I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't that frightened girl anymore. She was stronger now, henisten stiffen nekstrita bransapaction. Shh. She was stronger now, steadier. No, I said softly. I don't hate him. Hate would mean he still controls me. I've let that go. She nodded, her eyes glistening. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I wish I could forget him. You will, I whispered. Maybe not completely, but enough to live again. Axe. Your. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt peace settle between us. A few months later, we were called to testify in court. Seeing Rashid again was strange. He looked smaller somehow. Thinner, his arrogance replaced by something hollow. He tried to look at Aisha, but she didn't flinch. She sat straight, her voice steady as she answered the lawyer's questions. And when it was over, she turned to me and said, "He doesn't scare me anymore." And I realized that was her victory, not the sentence he got, not the punishment. But that moment, reclaiming her voice, the day the verdict came, we went to the seaside. The wind was cool, the waves gentle. Aisha ran barefoot near the water, laughing. I sat on a rock, watching her, remembering the first time I'd seen her, that little girl holding a broken doll, looking up at me with hope. Life had brought her back full circle, broken again, yes, but still capable of hope. And I thought maybe this is what motherhood truly means, not just giving birth, but choosing again and again to love through pain. Sometimes, late at night, I replay everything in my head. The betrayal, the discovery, the chaos. If I could go back, would I change anything? No. Maybe. Maybe I'd see the signs sooner. Maybe I'd trust my instincts more. Sometimes when I think back, I realize, if I hadn't walked that painful road, I wouldn't have become the woman I am today. I wouldn't have discovered the quiet strength that lives inside women like me, the ones who break but still stand. And I wouldn't have understood how deep a mother's love can truly go, deep enough to forgive, even when the heart can never forget. One afternoon, after class, a younger teacher came to me. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Miss Miriam," she asked, "how do you forgive someone who destroyed your trust?" I smiled a little sadly. "You don't forgive them for their sake," I said. "You do it for yours. Because holding anger is like drinking poison. It only hurts you." She nodded quietly, and in her eyes I saw my younger self, and I thought, maybe that's the real ending. Not revenge, not justice, just peace. Today, my daughter Aisha is studying psychology. She wants to help young girls understand their worth, to recognize when love turns into control, and to walk away before they lose themselves. Sometimes she gives talks in schools. She shares her story gently, never naming names, but always planting hope. After one of her talks, a young girl came up to her in tears. She said, "I thought it was my fault, but now I know it isn't." That night, Aisha hugged me and whispered, maybe Allah let me go through all that so I could help someone else. And I cried, not from pain this time, but from pride, because she had turned her wounds into wisdom. When I think of Rashid now, I don't see the man who broke us. I see the lesson he unknowingly gave, that we could survive. He will live with his guilt, his silence, his loneliness, but we live with freedom from lies, from fear, from shame, and in that freedom there is power of this kund. From shame, and in that freedom, there is power. Now, as I sit by the window with my evening tea, the sky painted in soft orange and gold, I whisper a quiet prayer, Ya Allah, protect every woman who still blames herself. Show her that she's not weak, she's simply been strong for too long, because I know now, There are many like me, women who loved too deeply, trusted too easily, stayed too long. And when they finally walked away, they weren't just leaving someone, they were returning to themselves. If you're listening to my story tonight, and you've ever carried that same pain, remember this. You are not defined by what someone did to you. You are defined by what you do after. Forgive yourself for not knowing sooner. Forgive yourself for loving the wrong person. And promise yourself, you'll never let your pain make you forget your worth. Soft, reflective music fades in. So tell me, my dear ones, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have fought quietly, patiently, or walked away and started over? Tell me in the comments below. And remember, no matter how broken your story feels, it can still have a beautiful ending. Fade out. This was Miriam's story for Rishan. So to support Preza to the write the story. This was Miriam's story. Thank you for listening.